Great. I think we can get started. Uh, Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. I really appreciate all of you joining this very important webinar uh, on a topic which is suggestions for overcoming regulatory challenges faced by Class IIa and certain Class IIb devices under the EU MDR. The reason we have chosen this topic because many of us are facing challenges to really do equivalence on certain Class IIb devices. So we have the expert today, Diane. She and I will try to do justice to share our experience, understanding the regulation. But we thought this topic is really interesting for all of us to understand the changes in the regulation lately and how we read while we do our tech files. So next slide, uh, I'll talk about certain instructions in the webinar. So all of you are muted right now. So Diane and I will do the presentation, but you will have an option to write your questions in the chat box, and Diane and I will be able to see it at the end of the presentation. But just in case, if you have any additional questions on the webinar, and we are going to put this webinar on our YouTube channel. So if you are viewing the webinar on replay on the YouTube channel, and you have questions, you can reach out to us on contact@saracasolutions.com. I'll talk about the agenda. So what we are going to cover in this webinar today. So we will have introductions. Dan, are you saying something?
Oh, sorry, I coughed. Apologies.
Okay, perfect.
Sorry.
Yeah, so we'll talk about common regulatory hurdles for Class IIa and Class IIb, regulatory strategy, clinical data equivalence, and I think the favorite topic for us, equivalence versus similar. I think Dan has done a wonderful work to make it easy for us, how we really differentiate between equivalence versus similar. Source of real world data, extended regulatory timelines, and some key takeaways. And I have some case studies which will be really helpful for you to understand what we're talking about in a real situation. And last but not the least, we'll talk about this very favorite topic of innovation versus regulation and how you can strike a balance so that you are producing innovative devices uh, and also making sure that you are following the regulations. So next, it's going to be my introduction. So this is Kuldeep. I am founder and CEO of Saraca Solutions. And as you know, two logos, we are doing this webinar along with DNV. Uh, Diane will talk about herself, but I have more than 20 years of experience into quality, regulatory, clinical, device, design, R&D. I have worked with large companies, mid-sized companies, smaller size companies, startups. There's a good variety of experience combining quality management system, taking your product from A regulation to B regulation, doing a lot of complaints, CAPA management. I have seen the transition of MDD to MDR in last 7, 8 years. Have worked with numerous customers and helped them build their strategy to convert their documentation from MDT to MDR and also making sure that they are effective in their market to sell their products. I have very deep expertise on US FDA, EU MDR, ISO 13485, ISO 14971, which is risk analysis, and also ISO 62304, which is for software risk analysis. I'm looking forward to have interesting discussion with you today. And now I hand over to Diane for her introduction and taking it forward.
All right. Thank you for all of that. And thank you everyone for your time today to attend this webinar. So for myself, I have over 25 years in healthcare. I used to be a bedside nurse in critical care. I'm an advanced practice nurse in Canada. And I also used to teach nursing. I've worked for larger companies as well and startups, not so many small. Did a lot of work in complaints as well and health hazard assessments. And then now working for Notified Body for the past 5 years. So sorry if I cough. I'm struggling with fighting a bit of a cold right now. Excuse me. So let's see. All right. So I probably don't need to tell everyone on this call about the regulatory hurdles for Class IIa and IIb, some IIb devices. So when I refer to IIb devices for this presentation, it does not include implantables. So we're going to focus more on those lower class devices. So looking at things like justifying your clinical evidence, claiming equivalence, which we're going to talk a lot about in this presentation, what you have to do to your QMS system, should have already done now. It was last May for MDR. Under the extension, the GSPRs, there's many of them now, especially for IVUs. A lot of struggles there. And the focus on post-market data, as we've seen from different member states audits. And then, of course, struggling with in-house regulatory expertise and staffing as we're trying to do the work. You're trying to do the work, but also keep up with all the changes. It's like I said, I probably don't need to tell you the struggles. Excuse me. So looking at choosing the right option, what is your regulatory strategy? You know, MDD was with us for a very long time, and I think everyone just kind of kept on keeping on, if you will. And now we have this MDR where regulatory regulations, they just keep moving. It feels like a target that just never finishes and settles. And we're looking at maybe now updating the MDR. Honestly, if they left it to me, I think I would write 3 separate ones. Those for Class A devices, a separate MDR for 2A and 2B. And then the MDR, I think, as it's written, is really more appropriate for 2B implantable and Class 3. I feel like it's easier to apply the MDR for those devices. But really think about Article 6110, if that's applicable for you. You know, when that first came out, many when we were transitioning initially from MDD, a lot of manufacturers saw the words no clinical data or not appropriate and just thought, all right, this is a get out of jail free card, and tried to apply it, and were quickly found out that that was not appropriate. And even for those devices where it is appropriate, it is a challenging way to go. It's doable. It's very doable, but it is not an easy choice. So those devices that we were talking about, lower risk, 2A, 2B, standard of care, well-established technologies. There are certainly some advantages that we're going to talk about in some of the later slides on how to collect sufficient clinical evidence that's proportionate to that risk device profile, which includes a well-designed level 8 survey, which again, I'm going to talk about in a further slide. All right, so what is clinical data? So the MDR defines it in Article 2 that it's literature. You can use literature as your route to conformity, but if you're a Class A 2A device and you've been doing your literature searches annually, and I want to point out, yes, annually. So if you look at MDCG 2027, Section C, for PMCF activities under general and specific, it says at least annually. So you will know from your literature searches that you're not coming up with much, and often nothing. Maybe you're an older device under MDD that has never had a clinical investigation. You do have PMS data, but when you look at MDCG 2026, I think it's Appendix 3, the table that talks about what is, ranks data and what is helping us understand what's sufficient data for your application. It's very clear that complaint vigilance data is not considered a high quality level of data for lots of reasons, and the limitations of, especially for the lower class devices, no one's reporting on them. So you have lower numbers of reports. If you've ever filled one out or reviewed them, you see that they're poorly done, not completed. Often you don't get a final report. So this would be an excellent, or could be an excellent, data source. And there's lots of, interest in pushing and making this more mandatory because of how rich a source it could be. But right now it is a very limited way to look at your device. Excuse me. And then if you have clinic equivalent data, and again, we're going to look at that in detail in the next, in the very next slide, actually, we'll start. And then also I wanted to be able to just push out there, do you think data from similar devices is clinical data? And I have a question mark there. And we're going to talk again in a further slide around why data from similar devices is not defined as clinical data in the MDR. Okay, as promised, we're going to talk about equivalence, because I was talking earlier to Kuldeep about still many years into MDR, we're still struggling with applications where there's confusion between what is an equivalent device and what is a similar device. And I think while you gain a lot of experience with the FDA and your applications, because of the substantially equivalent route, maybe it muddies the water a little bit. But I will tell you, as a reviewer, when you show up with your technical documentation and this is confused, it puts a little shade on the your understanding, or my assumption of your understanding of the MDR, that it feels like sometimes that you've taken your FDA application and just sort of applied it and didn't take the time to understand the MDR, appreciating its big, complex, changing. MDCG guidances, though, there's lots there, and especially this one is well written to help you understand the difference. So I just want to point out here really briefly, I've highlighted a couple of the important areas for the lower class devices before we get into it a little bit more, that these devices, there is no language around it needing to be MDR certified in the EU to be able to use an equivalent device. So here's one of the areas where a lower class device has a little more wiggle room, if you will. We always talk about sufficient clinical data, sufficient whatever. So here's another sufficient area, level of access to data related to devices that are claiming equivalence. So there's been a lot of chatter, if you're on LinkedIn, in the last year or so about needing contracts. But when you're these lower class devices, depending on your device, it might, sufficient levels might just be with the IFU and looking at what's in safety databases, like BFARM has, or MOD, or what have you. So you need to look at what's available, what you need, excuse me, and justify why that level of access data that you have is sufficient when you make this claim. So I'm not going to spend much time on these tables that is available in the guidance. I will just give you this sort of note around, I've worked at both BSI and now DNV, and every reviewer I know When there's an MDCG guidance, we use it, we audit to it. And when there is a table such as this is what we audit to. So you would need to have a really good reason to not set your technical file up using these tables. And I can tell you that we're going to go through every single one of these characteristics, and we're going to look for it in your file. Hopefully it's quickly and easily available like it would be in a table. So then that makes a efficient review for us and saves you time and money. So I can't think of a reason why one would not use these tables. So if you're used to using MedDev for equivalence, note there are some changes between language like similar and then on another one, same. So similar gives you a little more wiggle room, and same is obviously much more strict. And then making sure you really spend some time here if there's differences, and just explaining what those differences are. And at the bottom of each table, you have this scientific justification for if there's any clinically significant differences, and you need to shine light on those and explain what the gap is, what the difference is, in a scientific, like I said, valid way that we can sort of wrap our head around. We can agree with you on this. So here I just wanted to point out, especially under biologic, that's usually where there's the most struggle with equivalence, because it brings in that term, as I mentioned before, same materials and the characteristics. And, there's a lot of attention on materials and chemical characterization and shared guidelines. And so this needs a lot of time. So I'll say, plan. You really need to think about your regulatory strategy from the beginning right through, and how all of these pieces need to be accepted by your notified body. It needs to be in total, all three pieces. Okay, as I said.
I'm sorry, I just want to request you, on the previous slides, based on your experience, I think you might have seen a lot of literature, reviewed them. Do you want to just share some examples like why writers, do not follow this table as is, what maybe their challenges, which they might have shared with you, and how our audiences can, learn from your experience so that they follow this table, which is a lot easier for you to review or anybody else to review.
Yeah, thank you for that question. I'm going to say the first thing that popped into my head when you asked that question was, I'm surprised at how many applicants are not aware of this guidance.
Okay.
And the use of the table. So that's number one. So, I either through LinkedIn or I frequently go to the website where all the MDCG guidances are listed and look to see what's there. I have a really good LinkedIn group, if you will, that often posts and give me cues that these are being updated, either uprevved or new ones added. But that seems to be probably the number one. We at DMV work a lot of smaller manufacturers, and so it's a real struggle to keep up with all of this and still do your day job, if you will. So that, and then the biologic part is just challenging, period. And having that level of expertise in-house, especially if you're medium or smaller device company, you probably don't have that level of expertise in-house. So this
Great,
is, I guess, an area where you might really consider consulting. I have it in a later slide, but because you've brought this up right now, the struggle with equivalence is you've put together your whole entire technical portfolio and you've submitted it. And if you've chosen equivalence because the equivalent device has clinical data that you don't. So that's the other thing. You have to look at what clinical data that they have, and if it meets your needs for safety and performance to meet GSPR1, that you have that data to show that, you know, based on the state of the art, you are state of the art because of this equivalent. Even I'm still making that mistake. So,
Yeah.
but the risk you take is if your equivalent claim is not accepted by the notified body, you run the risk of your whole application falling apart if everything was based on that. So it is risky, and so really requires a lot of your time and attention to make sure, and why I've spent more time in this presentation really talking about equivalence.
Great. Thank you.
Okay, so MedDev also talks, this is what, I'm not going to remember Eric's last name, but on LinkedIn, he talks about regulatory lasagna. And so here we are in regulatory lasagna. I've given you the MDR, then I've given you the MDCG. Now we're talking MedDev, right? So all these different layers and all these different places do you go to, and the language is just that little bit different, which sometimes it's helpful to hear it in a different way, and then sometimes it makes it confusing. So I think here, the real take home is really looking at, because you found a equivalent device that is maybe marketed in the EU or in the US or wherever, again, you must ensure that the data that has been generated for that device meets the requirements for MDR. So that's the take home for me in MedDev on equivalence in this area. Okay, so here's what we talked about earlier about, let's really talk about what is the difference, where the rubber hits the road, if you will. And I've alluded to it several times. An equivalent device is essentially saying, this is so much like my own device that I can use this clinical data like it was my own. I've met technical, biological, and clinical characteristics that we showed in that table. And now when I find literature, I'm going to call it clinical data. I'm going to use it to support, yes, I meet GSPR 1, 8, whatever, for sure 1. And, all the things in Article 61 that talk about clinical data and sufficient clinical data, I'm going to use the data from this device. Okay, yes. Now a similar device, here's the it's not defined in MDR. So MDCG 2026 has a section on terms that are not defined in the MDR, like indications for use. Similar device is another one that is not defined, but generic device group is in the MDR. And so here's the definition. It's a set of devices having same or similar intended purpose, commonality of technology, allowing them to be classified in a generic manner. And literally that's it. There's no, yes, it speaks to clinical for the intended purpose, but sort of the same or mostly the same, I guess, in technology. But you can see it's a much less stringent assessment than equivalence is. And so here's probably why, I guess I would say, why this cannot be used like equivalent data to support your application. We use it for, how are these other devices performing? What did the state of the art analysis? Oh, I hope Ed Ball's not in here. I put hyphens between each of these. He's gonna really come down on me if you follow him on LinkedIn. It's as big of a bugaboo for him. But how does your device compare clinically? Is it performing? What sort of adverse events are happening with these similar devices? You don't have to just have one. What risks are with these similar devices, and what benefits? So you use this to compare, to benchmark your device against this, because this is what's generally acceptable. This is what healthcare is using. This is what surgeons are choosing to use. MDs are using in their practice. So how are you going to demonstrate that you perform at least as well as good as they are with your device? And then here's just that little bit again, that remember the risk of going the equivalent route is you won't know until you're into your technical review if it is approved by your notified body or not. Okay, lower risk devices. Standard of care and well-established devices. We hear sort of all this sort of floating around, and I have well-established devices are defined in MDCG 2026. There's some criteria that you have to meet them all. That's very helpful. Lower risk devices, again, I'm talking about not low risk, because if you were low risk, you wouldn't need a notified body to review. You're lower risk devices. So we kind of know what those are, but standard of care, I feel like it's one of those terms that we all know what it is, but we can't find a definition. We can't find a definition of what it is. So I'll give an example from one of my reviews. I was reviewing a needle and a syringe, and these are used millions of times a day globally. Everyone knows them. There really hasn't been that much evolution in them. So if you were thinking of standard of care, that would probably be a device that would come into your head. So when we look at, well, how then do you look at type of clinical data you need for that? And, that would be a type that manufacturer might think, hey, I can just use my PMS data because it's well established. It would meet all those criteria. It's like, yes, maybe. But when we started looking at use of them, the users themselves also need to be considered, because what happened with this device is a similar device came along, and a lot of larger hospitals have different companies of the same device. Like, so it's still a needle and syringe, but it might be made by this manufacturer, that manufacturer, and there's just a little bit different in how you had to activate the part of the syringe that would retract, the needle, that would retract. And then nurses were not using it in the way that it was intended. It wasn't retracting appropriately. And it was really just because they had been using this other similar device and were trying to use it in the same way. So you can see how, these terms, lower risk device, standard of care, well established, it doesn't mean that thorough evaluation of the user, the patients, the use environment, and looking at proactive data for them is still necessary. So I guess my point is, lower risk devices are still associated with serious adverse events and even death. Data collected under your MDD might not meet the MDR requirements for those reasons I just gave. Do a gap analysis with respect to what the MDR requirements are. Don't just do, find MDD in your documents, replace with MDR. Find essential requirements, replace with GSBR, please. It really requires a lot of effort, because here I have a list of possible consequences. Increased review time. It's going to cost a lot more money. There's possible denial of your review. I'm going to say the ones that have come close to denial by me have been lower class devices, because of all the things I just said, just did not pay attention to the gap between MDD and what they had for MDR. You might have to narrow your intended purpose or your target population, because there's no data. on your device. And, saying to your notified body reviewer, well, my device has been on the market for 20 years or 30 years. And if there's anyone in the audience that's ever said that to me, they will be able to tell you that my answer to them was, that's great. You've had 20 years to collect data. So, yes, it matters that you're a legacy device with a long history, but please be aware of the gaps. Were you going to ask me a question? I heard a beep.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, Dan, which you raised here. And I think a lot of manufacturers, in my experience, sort of struggle. They see that, hey, my device has been doing really great. And we have, collected data from more database and others, and very less adverse events. Um, but as you rightly mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, that you cannot really 100% trust that data because it is not been adequately reported, right? So, what should be your suggestions to really generate evidence is for somebody like yourself when you review, you really look at that, hey, it's been there for many years, and though there have been less adverse events reported, but at the same time there's a good clinical history the manufacturer have developed over the years, right? Which is a little more convincing. Uh, do you have any suggestions there, like how they can collect this data and add into the submissions to you?
Yeah. Thanks for that question. And I have a couple slides that I think will help support what I'm going to answer. But really what I'm looking for is, post-market data is obviously general data and it's reactive data. And what notified bodies are looking for and what the MDR is looking for, so hence notified body, is a much more proactive approach to understanding your device, how it's being used, what's going on with the users, has there been any clinical guideline updates, all those things that affect the clinical use of your device. So we really want to see that you're more proactive than perhaps you were under MDD. And, honestly, notified bodies were not, PMCF is not new to MDR. What's new is the focus on it, is elevating it, and notified bodies being enforcing it much more. So I think the very first thing I would answer to you is don't rely on post-market. If you have a device that, that you're able to, there are some manufacturers that have a really robust post-market. Like the only example that I have known in years is an implantable. And every time a device was explanted, they knew because you had to order a device for it, and they followed up 100% on those. So if you have a system like that, that gives me confidence that you're going to know about everything that's happened. But that's rare. But I'm just saying it's not impossible, but it's rare. So you need to find a proactive way to go and find out what's happening with your device.
Thank you.
Like this. So Marcus Torr and et al. In 2023 published this in the Journal of Medical Device Regulation. And he provides this article free. If you find him on LinkedIn, you can request this article that they present. It's the first time, MDCG 2026 has that, level 4, and they talk about high quality surveys because a lot of lower risk devices use survey because maybe there's no registry for you to use. So this really is a path to consider. Depending on what type of data you need, you don't pick a survey and then look to see what kind of data you can collect with it. You really need to think about what you need to collect to show safety and clinical performance, and then is a survey appropriate? And then you're going to tell your notified body why it's appropriate. So they have this article that they describe the difference. And I use this all the time because really, I haven't found anything else. There's certainly nothing in the MDR, and MDCG didn't really define it very well. So they've gone ahead and tried to show us, the difference between the two. So here again is where a lower class device has some wiggle room when we look at the totality of your evidence. So you're going to show us, your bench testing, your standards that you tested to your standards, all preclinical. So supportive can't be used in place of clinical data, but I'm going to consider it and weight it more than, say, a class 3 device that goes into a coronary artery. Okay, then your post-market data, that is clinical data, and you're going to show me trending, and you're going to add that again. Now here is a level 8 that, again, it's a lower level of quality survey, but it is proactive. And you can get some data that when you add it all together, you've been on the market for 10 years, 20 years, it, again, will look at that totality of evidence, but this at least ticks the box to help you show proactive, that you have a proactive approach to looking at what's going on with your device in clinical practice. And then I know I'm just kind of mindful of the time, but I'll hurry up a little so you have some time for your case studies. I'm not going to talk too much about real world data because there's lots of presentations out there, but don't forget about all these different areas. They all have some challenges for sure. So like, medical claims from hospitals where they're not coded correctly. I know someone talked about they changed devices and they were still coding to another device. So yes, there's all these challenges with real world data, but, take a look when you're looking at your regulatory strategy, if there's something in here that might be fit for purpose for your device. Okay, so don't forget all the extended regulatory timelines. Say notified bodies have definitely increased their capacity, but if everybody's waiting till the last minute, the last month, remember it takes a year and a half, sometimes 2 years to get an application through. A lot of that depends on the quality of your application and how long it takes for you to respond, show up with appropriate, sufficient clinical data. So just, remember all the complexities with trying to document this so that it is MDR ready. You will have these slides, so I'll just kind of skip ahead here. So engage earlier with your notified body, strengthen your clinical evidence strategy, plan. If you talk about, look at your PMCF plan, maybe you should get going on that before your application so you have some of that data. Stay up to date on MDCG and design with compliance to the MDR. All right. Well, that is my presentation, and sorry to just go a little quicker at the end, but I'm just mindful of time. Sorry if I took too long there.
No, I think you were in the right flow, Diane. I think our audiences would be really, be helpful for them to distinguish between similar and equivalence, which has always been a challenge. And
Yes.
I think it is very great. So I'll have a couple of case studies. One of them is for a Hammerstate wound dressing powder. And this case study came to us, somebody else did the technical file, and once notified body had an observation, it came to us, and we have looked at, these were the 4 major observations. Safety and performance objectives were not defined appropriately, and I think in some cases they were really defined loosely, so we had to really redo them altogether. Equivalency not demonstrated as defined in MDCG. 2020-5, which Diane has covered in one of our slides earlier. State of the art did not include alternatives. I think this is the common mistakes we have seen, that manufacturers try to focus more onto their device and do tons of literature, but they don't discuss about alternatives, similar devices, a clinical background, and it becomes really, really hard for the notified body auditors to know more about the device alternatives when they review. Insufficient information in PMS and PMCF regarding the clinical data, which has been consistent, I think, from 2017 till 2021. I have seen a lot of improvement from 21, but still there is a lot of gaps. When we see some of these tech file CRs, they come to us after notified body has reviewed them for the first time. So what we did as a company, we defined safety and performance objective based on the efficacy and complications reported, justified claims with acceptance criteria, and supported with clinical literature data, which has to be really rich data. Demonstrated equivalency table as defined in MDCG, and it's tied to what Dan talked about, that there is a table in MDCG guidelines. You have to just follow that as is. But as she rightly mentioned, that many people do not really read MDCG, and they try to create their own, and it becomes really hard for notified body reviewers to follow the table, which is not in the same format, right? You might have the content there, but the expectation is that you follow as per the regulation. Clinical background, similar devices, alternative treatment options. We have looked at those available, as per our SMEs, and made this state of the art really rich. Perform vigilance databases searches to support PMS data. We have a lot more rich content in the vigilance database now compared to like 5-6 years ago. So it's really good for you to go all of them, search, don't leave any of them, and it'll make your case much more stronger. Last but not the least, updated information PMCF report regarding the survey data collection, and we have used the survey examples which Diane mentioned in the previous slides. I think I have one more. Then if you can move on to the next one, I have one more case study. This is for a midline catheter. And we had the similar situation when we received the file. We had incomplete information provided on clinical literature review, which has always been a challenge. Many people who have been writing scientifically before the regulation came in 2016-17, we have looked at many CRs which were written by PhDs, and not one PhD, like 5 PhDs as writer, but they did not read the regulation. So I think they have written this almost like a thesis, much longer than what is required, but didn't really understand what was really expected in the CR. So it was again similar situation here. Insufficient information related to regulatory guidance documents, which I mentioned earlier. Missing information for safety and performance objectives, endpoints not addressed, all clinical claims, very, very important. You have to make sure that you have to connect endpoints to your clinical claims, indications, and lifetime, and alignment with the revised state-of-art search and analysis. What we did here, we performed literature searches again, provided literature search protocol and report, which is very, very important for you to really provide to the notified body auditor how you have searched, what was your criteria. We have updated CR in accordance with MDCG guideline document 2026. Clinical evidence needed for medical device previously C-marked and other MDCG documents. We have also provided the supporting evidence for safety and performance claims data acceptance criteria from both S&P and state-of-art literature. So I just wanted to just talk about these two cases, not a whole lot. I think in summary, endpoints connecting with clinical claims is very, very important aspect. When you do your searches, make sure that you write a nice protocol and don't deviate from that protocol in your report, and connect both of them. When you write CR, obviously you are going to write CEP, so make sure that both documents are connected to each other. And also keep in mind that notified body reviewers are reviewing a lot of documents, so you have to make their life a little bit easier so that they understand your document easily. Don't make it too big and too short. Also, it should be really, really nice for them to understand on what they're doing, as per the regulation. And that way you will have your report and results come quite quickly and less observations. We can move on to next slide, Dan. Great. So this is my interesting slide, and I kept it to the last. We always hear this debate between innovation and regulation. We always say that European countries have a lot more regulation that's hurting the innovation, and there are countries where you have less regulations, right, and which is easier to innovate. But I think the trick is how you make balance between both. You don't really have too much heavy regulation, which might hurt innovation, and you also do not have no regulation or very less regulation. AI is a topic which everybody talks about. Is it going to be good, bad, and ugly for many of the things which we're doing in our life? And there are definitely risks associated with AI, which we all know. But at the same time, if we have right kind of regulations, right, it'll be good. A couple of points here. So limited historical clinical data for novel materials, which has always been a challenge. It's a new material, never been used, right? So you have to have a lot more data collection, for something like this. Artificial intelligence, which is fairly new. You don't really have a lot more history, clinical data to support. So you will have to really do hard work to provide good evidences of the tests you would have performed. Digital health technology significantly complicates the generation of robust clinical evidence. Number two is rapid innovation in Class IIa and Class IIb categories, such as AI-powered diagnostic systems, which have been really helpful. If you look at risk and benefit analysis, it looks like benefit is much higher. But at the same time, how do you make the balance to make sure that you show in your documentation that benefits are much more than the risk associated with it. Smart infusion pumps, wearable health monitors, challenges conventional conformity assessment procedures. Third, integration of software and advanced functionalities may lead to reclassification, subjecting devices to more rigorous conformity assessment and oversight. I think we might have done probably 15 to 20 tech files which were written, and we have rewrite all of them because SAMD, software as a medical device standard, was not really followed because the traditional device did not really had a software, and manufacturer had a small piece of software, didn't really realize that they have to really follow 62304 and integrate the software and have to do a lot of testings again. It's a very important aspect. Last but not the least, underdefined regulatory routes coupled with delayed reviews, ethical concerns, around algorithm transparency and data ownership often result in hesitancy among manufacturers, reviewers, and healthcare providers in adopting new technologies. So I think new technology is really good for us. All of us need it, but at the same time, you also have to understand the other side of the table who may or may not be so adaptive to a new technology. So you have to describe the technology really well in a simple language so that the reviewer can understand easily and can relate to the benefit which a new technology may have. I think that's it. Now we are about 9 minutes on Q&A. So I would request maybe organizer Satyam to open for questions, and I can look at Q&A table here if we have some questions. We have some questions which I think I can read. Joseph actually has asking a question about can we demonstrate biocompatibility justification based on the literature for class 1 device? So then if I can repeat, can we demonstrate biocompatibility justification based on the literature for a class 1 device?
So I guess I don't really understand. Does that mean there's no standard for it, or you haven't done your own testing? If it's you haven't done your own testing, no, that would always be a requirement. I don't review class 1 devices because that's doesn't require clinical. But I can't imagine that not doing your own testing would be acceptable.
Yeah, I agree. Absolutely. I think you definitely have to have your own testing and biocompatibility testing. Your manufacturing site may be different, your clinical setup may be different. So, it is definitely required. I agree with you. Let me see if I have more questions here. Sorry? Open Q&A. Okay, there is a question. Dan, I can read that. How can manufacturer of Class IIa and certain Class IIb medical devices navigate the specific regulatory challenges under the EU MDR? And what are the key strategies for ensuring compliance?
Yeah, so I guess I'll go back to my prior comment around plan, that you need to develop a regulatory strategy that takes a look at what you had under MDD. What are the gaps between that and MDR? So you need to become very familiar with the MDR and the requirements within. So the MDCG guidances are helpful, very helpful, because they offer templates like what I showed. And then MDCG 2026 has, that tables to help you as well. But it is mostly around really planning a regulatory strategy around how you're going to have sufficient clinical data that meets, whatever residual risks you have, whatever's going on with your device. You need to be able to show you're in control. You understand it. You know how your device relates to similar. You spoke about alternatives that you had in your case study. Really, I'm looking in the alternatives like you show me. Is there a pharma that might be more applicable to a certain target population than yours? So I can understand that you understand the benefits and risks of all these alternatives and where your device fits in with it. So there's no easy answer. It's a lot of work. It's just
Absolutely.
A lot of work.
Yeah, and I think as you rightly said, plan is very important, and I think I would reiterate that understand the regulation multiple times while you're doing your documentation. It's not just one time. I think it's always refreshing. You will find something new every time you read. So it's always a good idea, read and probably have a debate, discussion within your teams so that your understanding becomes better. I have one more question from Viswajit, and he's saying, how can we justify clinical claims if we don't have enough clinical data?
You can't.
There you go.
I guess this is a short answer. Because clinical claims have to be supported by data. So you're either going to have to remove that claim or as we talked about with your plan, your regulatory strategy, knowing what your marketing is wanting to claim for your device, then you must create a strategy to collect data to support that your device actually is, can support those benefits.
No, absolutely, I agree with you. And I think the catch here is enough. So I think enough
Okay.
literature data. I think enough is a little bit vague, but you need to have adequate literature, right, to support your clinical claims because reviewer are expecting that you have to prove your claims with some sort of literature. So I think, as you rightly pointed out, if you do not have enough, then you cannot justify clinical claims. But I think you always have to work to generate clinical data before you do the submission, so that you can substantiate your CR or sections of your tech file by a rich clinical data.
Yeah, to your point, the catch is enough. Those are
Yeah.
those words like sufficient and enough and that are really hard. But I would add to my answer then is justify. You don't just say to me, I have this, with two patients or whatever. Put what you have and justify in a scientifically valid way why you think that is enough. That's probably the most helpful part to defining enough.
Great. I have one more question on class one. I know you don't do class one, Dan, but Dan is asking, is usability file required for class 1N and NM devices?
Measuring like class 1M.
Yeah.
Oh, so again, yeah, I don't do them, but I'm going to. So when I think of class 1M, I think of like a syringe comes to my mind right away. Yeah, I would say it's gonna be a guess for me. I can't think of why it wouldn't be. The MDR as a whole, as I said, if it was up to me, I would write a separate one for class 1 devices, but
Yeah.
the MDR is applicable from class 1 right through to class 3 implantable. It applies, all the relevant part applies to all. So what would be a good reason to not do usability studies for your device? I think would be the question. Like, how could you justify not doing them?
Absolutely. No, I agree. I think we can take one more questions because we are about the time. Vaishali is asking, for low-risk medical devices, is it necessary to have a contract or agreement with the manufacturer in order to claim equivalence in the CR?
No. So if you look back at the slides and again, look at MDCG 2025, there's a whole section there on if you are not a class 2B implantable or class 3, that you have to have sufficient access. And so the example I gave was maybe the IFU, maybe their website, maybe their safety database information so that you understand the clinical use, the risks, the technology of the device. Sometimes I've seen companies actually test that device themselves for the biologic, so they can meet that part if they need to. But go and read that part of the MDCG, and you'll see that it's clearly stated there. You just have to have sufficient level of access. That's hard to define depending on your device, but a contract is not necessary or absolutely necessary. I'll just say that.
Great. Thank you. I think we have a few more questions, but we are about the time.
Okay.
Perfect. I think we will, folks whose question has not been answered, I think we will email. But I really appreciate all of you joining. Dan, you want to just say a few words before we close?
Yeah, I would just again like to thank everyone for their time. And this is a very important topic because most medical devices are Class 2 and 2A and 2B that are out there and used every single day. So I thank you for your time and attention today.
Great, Dan. Thanks for doing it. I think it must be really, really helpful for our audiences to listen from you and make their documentation much more finer. So when they goes in your hands, you approve them. So thanks a lot for doing it, and thanks everyone for joining. We're going to replay of this webinar will be put on our YouTube channel. So in case some of your colleagues have missed it, you can hint them to go to YouTube channel and you can watch over there. Thank you. Have a good one. Take care.
Bye, everyone.